Hello, I'm Daniel Feynman here, and I'm welcoming you back to talk about Chapter 1 in Fundamentals of Corporate Budgeting, the who, the what, and the why of budgeting. You may remember that budgeting really serves two main purposes, planning and control. The planning function is everything we do from the time we start to produce the budget, gathering the data, testing things, looking at alternatives, all the way through the time we get the budget approved. That's all the planning function, the planning cycle. Once the budget is approved, all the way through the length of it, whether it's a short-term budget for a few months, typical operating budget of 1 year, or a longer capital budget, the remaining time after approval until the end is for control purposes. We use it to attempt to manage what we actually accomplish to the budget as closely as possible so that we can make sure that the budget has value. We're accomplishing the goals that we set out. Typically, we're going to go through a cycle of forecast first, in other words, use some financial models to test our assumptions, then budget. Once we budget, we start to implement, step 3. Once we implement or operate for a period of time, we're going to measure the difference between the budget itself and what we accomplished, also called variance analysis. We're going to look for those levels that are outside of our acceptable range. We'll make adjustments wherever we can, and then we'll repeat the cycle over again. There's really 4 different elements of budget you want to remember. There's the operating budget, which is the vast majority of the budget. This leads directly to the financial budget. The financial budget has a bridge between the beginning of the financial budget and the end of the operating budget, and that is the income statement. We've got a discretionary budget for those items that we may or may not choose to spend money on, research and development, training, marketing, etc. If we choose to invest in capital long-term major projects for growth, that would be our capital budget. And don't forget the cash budget, which measures how much cash we expect to have come in and how much cash typically is going out. What we also want to think about is you can create a budget in really 5 different ways. The traditional static budget, where we make all the assumptions and lock in the numbers. We could create a flexible budget, and I'll give you an example of that when you look at your Excel models. A flexible budget separates fixed and variable costs and takes the variable total costs across a range of possible outcomes. A zero-based budget, which is effectively where we take everything we cannot justify down to zero. An activity-based budget, which most of us are never going to create because it's much too complex, which takes all of the indirect costs and breaks them out and identifies the specific activity and the cost, so what we actually produce drives the indirect costs rather than a budget. And then the capital budget itself, which we'll talk more about later when it comes to major outside projects. One of the spreadsheets I provided for you is an Excel model of a flexible budget. Take a look at that and see if you can work through those different elements. If you have any other questions, we will talk when we get into Chapter 2.